Good evening, everyone. Calling to order the Town of Hingham Board of Selectmen meeting for December 11, 2018. These microphones don't project volume, so if you can't hear me, let me know. Show of hands, I'll speak up.
A little low, Paul. A little low.
Okay. First item, approval of the minutes, December 6, 2018. Take a motion.
So moved. Second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Public comment on items not on the agenda. Recognize John Ferris. Welcome, John. Whatever's your pleasure. Microphone's fine.
Thank you for recognizing me. My name is John Ferris. I'm the Director of Business and Support Services for the Hingham Public Schools. And I wanted to take a moment at tonight's meeting to inform the public about a no-heat event that occurred today at Foster School on Tuesday, December 11th. At approximately 6:30 in the morning, our lead custodian noticed that the boiler had failed to kick on overnight. These boilers are on a timer. They turn on at 6:30 in the morning and they shut off at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And or in the evening, if the boilers hit a temperature of 55 degrees, they'll turn itself back on. Doesn't matter where it is in the building, it'll turn itself back on. And once these big buildings get heated up, they often retain heat for, quite a while, unless it gets really, really cold for many, many days. This morning, the exhausto fan control system failed on the boiler, boiler number 1, sometime overnight or even in the morning when it didn't kick on. And by the time the tech arrived and diagnosed the problem and got the boiler safely running, another couple of hours would have elapsed. So we decided that we were going to evacuate the students and to the high school using our emergency evacuation plans so we could keep the kids safe and warm for the day. Relocation went very, very smoothly. We had 12 buses, took students to teachers to the high school. Food service operations were moved for lunch to the high school. The directors and administrative team assisted with arrival and parent pickups. Police managed orderly access for parents because many parents came to dismiss their child, and administrators helped organize that as well. And then the teachers managed their classes. At the day's end, we released high school and middle school students 15 minutes early, and we did that so we could mitigate traffic congestion and also minimize the late returns for the elementary runs. We only have 21 buses, so there's a logistical issue in having everybody go home at the same time. So, all the kids are now safe at home and sound. The building is all warmed up, and we will be having school as normal at Foster tomorrow. No one likes to implement these emergency procedures, but I think this was unfortunate, but it was also a good drill. All of our procedures and our team work very well, coordination between the departments and also police and law enforcement. I think the thing went very, very well, and we've been working very hard on those types of plans. I would also like to mention, if anyone would like to learn more about Foster plans, the school building committee will be meeting this Thursday night, December 13th, in school department conference room at 7:30. The agenda is posted on the town website. So I thank you for allowing me to provide some context for this event. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to try to exercise a little discipline with respect to time today. So first item on the agenda is budget hearings, elder services.
Is public comment over? Or?
Oh. Yes, Ms. Salisbury.
Thank you. I'm here with a few comments about the Aquarian proposal that may be put before the voters at town meeting, and I would like to urge you a couple of things. I believe before voters can be asked to vote on anything, they need more information, more facts about what is proposed for their vote. Specifically, otherwise I don't think they can make an intelligent vote, and it will be a decision that will be long-standing, and they will be stuck with the results. It's an important vote, and I think they deserve as much information as you can legitimately provide. For example, what do I mean by information? Whatever the results of your review of your financial model, whatever that is, good, bad, or indifferent, that should be released. Information about negotiations, any negotiations that are ongoing with the town of Hull that may lead to an intermunicipal agreement. Certainly, the terms of the intermunicipal agreement are very important to Hull ratepayers, of course, and Hull is not in a position, much of a position, to negotiate from a strong stance. I think that the town of Hingham has a responsibility to Hull ratepayers, and they should be treated equitably. However that is, however you define it, however that is, they should be treated equitably, and they shouldn't be forced to just accept an agreement that doesn't do that. All of these, the RFP, if you have results there, all of these things, play into what eventually will be presented to the town meeting. And as you know, town meeting is not the best place to make long presentations, and there's limits on debate, 4 minutes. So I think all of this should happen prior to you getting to town meeting. I think you have a duty as public servants, as the leaders of this town. I think it is your duty to have some forums, such as the water company has been having, to truly present and allow for debate and allow for questions in order to bring the townspeople, bring the voters up to speed. Otherwise, if this kind of neglect of the voters, you might call it, goes on, I think you will develop a real credibility problem by the time we get to town meeting. So I just urge, for your own sake, for the voters' sake, I would urge you to take heed of what I'm saying and, try to do a better job dispensing information and making sure voters know what they're voting on when it comes to that. Thank you.
Just a minute, sir. A rush to the podium. Who wants to go first?
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Ed Demko. I reside at 18 Bradley Park Drive. I'd like to speak to the potential takeover of the water company as contemplated by the Selectmen. Last summer, Aquary gave Selectmen a challenge, have an independent, mutually agreed upon financial firm to check Aquarian's widely differing figures on how much Selectmen's proposed water system takeover would cost customers. You decided to go it alone and pick the firm entirely on your own pay for the result. Questions. Have you picked an accounting firm?
This is a public comment, Mr. Demko. State what you're going to state,
Okay.
and we'll move on to the next speaker.
Did you or will you have a public RFP process for the Selectmen of such a firm? When can residents expect to see your results? It doesn't sound right to me. A review should be I have no obligation or allegiance to either side in a disagreement or something that's important to the community. We deserve facts, not faulty figures or one-sided judgment about them. I hope that you will be working with the Aquarian to come up with a fair, open, independent review of the differing figures.
Thank you, Mr. Demko. Sir, identify yourself by name and address.
David Overhauser, 26 Governor Long Road.
How are you, sir?
I'd like to sort of obliquely address the takeover of the water system. But basically, I'm thinking we're going to indebt ourselves to a significant amount of money. I think we're neglecting something we're going to have to face right at eye level pretty soon, and that's the rising waters. I know we've put money in to raise pier levels and things like that. Drive along the road near the water at high tide. It's not a long way down. And if we're going to raise these buildings up, we should build for the future, not for the next 5 years or so. So if it's possible, we should reconstruct the plans to allow for that, because when you take a building and you're going to jack it up and move it, it's going to cost you a lot of money if you're going to raise to keep it out of the water. Or maybe we should relocate it where buildings, if possible, a little farther away from the water on higher ground so we can eliminate this. But I think if we indebt ourselves to the tune of 105, 180, whatever the total figure is for the water system. I think we're going to leave ourselves open in the future. We may not have the buying power to go in and do these other things. And these new structures that are on the planning board anyway have to be addressed now and build them for the future, not for next year or 5 years down the road.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's move to the Elder Services budget.
Okay, so we have Barbara Farnsworth as the Director of Elder Services, and Don Sibler is the Chair of the Council on Aging. Getting right to the budget, on Roman numeral page 10, Barbara's requested, excuse me, Barbara's requested departmental cost for, or budget number for this year was $274,391. I'm recommending same. That's an $11,968 increase, or a 4.56% increase over last year. So as we've been doing with all the rest of the budgets, these are level service requests, and Barbara will walk us through a presentation explaining what her department's responsibilities cover.
Great, thank you. I'd like to actually introduce also Gail Faring, Chrissy Roberts, and Kristen Arute. They're in the audience and also sit on the council. Okay,
Welcome, ladies. Thank you for coming.
so we'll start. Okay. 238. In preparing the slide, I think we took a look at what our mission is. The council 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, went through a very long strategic planning process and developed a mission and goals and objectives around that mission. And the mission is to support the independence of Hingham's population 60 and older and advocate for their needs, as well as to enhance the quality of their lives. The process, we're 4 years into the 5-year plan, so they'll be starting that process again very shortly, probably within the next couple of months. Again, we're looking at the mission statement and their visions and values. Services, as you all know, we operate a full-time senior center. We provide a wide variety of programs, services, and activities. And in developing those programs, services, and activities, we actually use a wellness model, and we look at the 6 dimensions of wellness: physical, social, spiritual, intellectual, emotional, and occupational. And along with that, we tie the programs and services into our long-range plan before we actually look at developing a new program, a new service, seeking grant money. How does that fit in with the plan, and does that really meet our mission? We assist with applications for benefits programs. Many of you may be familiar with open enrollment for Medicare D. That period just ended, so fall's very busy for us with people coming in trying to decide which prescription drug plans to use. It's also fuel assistance application season, and we process the fuel assistance application for everybody in Hingham regardless of age. We provide transportation services. That's probably one of our key services. And in fiscal 18, we did 5,749 rides to 317 different individuals. We partner with many services and organizations. I don't think we could accomplish what we do down there without the benefit of those organizations and other service agencies. Number one, not only in what they deliver to the residents of Hingham for in-home services, but also for the programs and educational opportunities that they provide at the senior center. One of our partner agencies, Norwell VNA, we just finished Matter of Balance program. It's an 8-week program that we try to run once a year. Unfortunately, we're going to be able to run it a second time this year because we had a waiting list of about 20. And as you all know, we utilized a large corps of volunteers. For fiscal 18, we had approximately 140 volunteers that contributed 9,699 hours. That translates to 5.3 FTEs. We could not operate our program without our volunteers. In looking at benchmarks, I chose not to look at our comparable communities. I kind of looked at national accreditation. We're currently in the process of submitting an application to be reaccredited again. Currently, we're one of 9 senior centers within Massachusetts that's nationally accredited, and one of 115 within the country. And what that means is that National Institute of Senior Centers establishes there's 9 standards that we have to meet, and those standards range anywhere from purpose and planning to governance, program development, evaluation of our programs, fiscal, and records and facility. I think the biggest benefit of accreditation for us is that it really keeps us on a track to try and provide the best services that we can, as well as keeps the transition from year to year with different council members and staff people all working towards the same goals and objectives. Okay. Some of our key initiatives are continuing to evaluate the physical space needs of the senior center. I think everybody's pretty well aware at this table anyway that we've become very cramped for space, and that, you know, several programs and services that we'd like to offer, but we just don't have the physical space to do that, and particularly for those programs that may involve the addition of additional staff. There's just no office space down there to put another body in. One of the things we will be doing this year is evaluating our volunteer program. We did that 5 years ago, and that involves surveying the volunteers, asking what they, you know, how they benefit from the program, what they think of the program, and looking at longevity. We have several volunteers that have been with us between 15 and 20 years. The other thing that the council will be doing is they'll be planning for the transition for a new director come over the winter months. I think it will go smoothly. And then the other thing that I talked briefly about is they will need to begin review and revisions of their 5-year strategic plan. As you saw from the budget, our salaries total $255,176, and our expenses are $19,215. Probably the major portion of our expenses has to do with the transportation program for fuel and vehicle repairs, and 2 of the part-time van drivers. And then also through our grant from the Executive Office of Elder Affairs, we use approximately another $48,000 in salaries to support the transportation program.
Well, I had the opportunity to be with you last week at the meeting of the Massachusetts Council on Aging, and as I said in our meeting last week, sometimes you don't know how lucky you are with the folks that you have serving particularly this vulnerable population until you get out of town. And I was so proud to be there with you, Barbara, and so proud of the programs that you offer. You're absolutely right that the space is not pretty, but you maximize every inch of it. And again, I think your professionalism in the operation of the center speaks volumes for the town, but also I think, you know, allows the department to be as effective as it possibly can be in serving the needs of our seniors. And the thing that I guess I didn't fully understand, and I think that the accreditation process speaks to that piece, is in hearing some of the stories of governance issues in other towns, I think to be able to keep you know, volunteers and leadership and staff on the same page in moving the agenda forward for the senior center, you know, kind of puts the distractions aside and allows us to keep focusing on, I think, what's important. One initiative I know you and I have talked a little bit about, and maybe it's sort of embedded in some of the stuff you're continuing to think about, is on-demand transportation. Mm-hmm. So it seems like just from the van service alone, transportation is a big driver of budgetary expense. So to me, it's a big driver of elder needs. And I was just wondering if you've if you've heard anything in that realm, in the, in the state or on the national level in terms of, best practices.
So some of the programs that have cropped up that we're starting to look at before we actually, I think, advertise to people or promote among people is there's a program out there now called Granny A Go-Go.
Sure it is.
But it operates much the same way as Uber does, only you don't have to have an online account to be
Yeah.
able to use
Yeah.
the service. And some people, it's in other parts of the country, and we're
That's
trying to
very
narrow
interesting.
down whether or not it's in this part of the country. We also have a grant we participate in a consortia grant with South Shore Community Action Council, and they provide transportation to and from Boston for medical appointments.
Okay.
And that's something that we've talked to them about in terms of, can we do more of an on-demand? Can you look at maybe doing some contracts with Uber or Lyft or those kinds of things so that people can just call in? There's some software that's been developed that they can actually pay the Uber driver and/or the Lyft driver, and then just the client would reimburse them.
Okay.
So we're
Okay.
continuing to talk about those kinds of things
Okay.
in this area.
And then just, one more point I'd like to make, and that is just how appreciative I am of your time and efforts with respect to the targeted tax relief analysis. I've been meeting tomorrow again with Jean and Sue Nickerson, Jean Montgomery, the treasurer collector, and Sue Nickerson, the town accountant, to continue to try to move that forward. But your help over the summer in sort of developing those proposals, I think, is invaluable. And again, I think, potentially will be a benefit for our senior population.
Thank you.
I would just echo that, and it's always, at the Volunteer Appreciation Luncheon, when you see a room full of people at the South Shore Country Club, you understand that there are just so many different people involved in this. But also, Barbara, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for your leadership, not only with the Council on Aging, but with your staff and all the different volunteers. You make it all happen. You do it in a collegial, respectful, kind, and friendly manner. And I particularly appreciate the work that you've done to help educate this community about the demographics in Hingham. And I appreciate that, the university studies, including the Tufts work that we've just received, that really put some data behind it that's going to shape a lot of the policy that we have. And as we move forward on those initiatives, we will continue to be grateful for the work, the leadership, and the example that you've set. We wish you well, but we are sorry to see you moving on.
My wife's mother asked me if she's going to make it to 100, and I said, I don't know, but
Gonna.
if she does, I'm sure a lot of that is attributable to you, because she really enjoys coming up there, and thank you so much for it.
I love her new T-shirt.
I don't know if I want to know what it says.
I made it to 95 one, but I
Oh,
got
that
one.
one,
It's a
yeah.
great shirt. Thank you.
I'd just like to add, so we've been talking tonight about Barbara's leadership in the Council on Aging, and while that's absolutely true, her retirement leaves a massive void in Town Hall, not just at the council, but in the entire organization. Myself, all the department heads, whenever we need a level head to run an idea by or a thought to get some positive feedback from, that's where we go. And that's a massive void for me personally and from everybody in the building and across the organization. So thank you, Barbara.
Well, it's fun to have those opportunities, though. It keeps one from getting bored.
We know that there will be opportunities in the next few months to celebrate your wonderful career here. But this evening, I heard a few people kind of starting to clap, and I feel like that's kind of appropriate.
I said, oh, good, I get to get rid of my red jacket next year.
Being a flip-flop.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Susan?
Board of Health. Greetings, welcome.
Hi, Susan.
So we have Susan Sarney, the director for the Board of Health Department. She is here in presenting a departmental requested budget of $345,829. Again, I am recommending same for a $12,540 increase, or a 3.7% increase over last year. And once again, that is a level services requested budget. Her budget within the book begins on page 222. Susan? Whatever you need.
Thank you. I'll go through this. All right, so I can click. The Health Department is required by local law and regulation, as well as state regulations, to perform many critical duties to protect public health. In addition to reporting to the Board of Health, I also report to the Mass Department of Public Health and Mass Department of Environmental Protection. I'll go forward a little bit into the variety and volume of the Health Department through prevention, planning, and enforcement. The Health Department prevents disease and illness within the community through the following. We do adult immunizations. Mass Department of Public Health gives us 60 vaccines. In addition to that, we bought 180 vaccines to give out at our group homes of Thaxter and Lincoln. We do homebound through advertising with Meals on Wheels. We do clinics with the fire department, the police department, DPW, library, and the transportation. We hold a Saturday open clinic here at the town hall for those over 18. And this year, we worked with the town clerk. We did a vote and vaccination for early voters, so that was really popular this year. We got a lot of people vaccinated while they came in for early. Yeah, it was a great idea. We also do referrals for victims, for those who lost their dwellings in fires or through condemnation. We do food inspections. We have about 161 food establishments in town that are required by the state to be inspected twice a year. So we have a food inspector who does twice a year compliance checks, and then we have to go and re-inspect if there was any violations to the state code. And we also get reports if anybody in town was at a food establishment and got sick. So there's reportables that we need to check out. We do health screenings through melanoma education, blood pressure clinics, and medication review. We also do beach testing from Memorial Day to Labor Day. We have about 8 beaches in town that we test weekly for enterococci, which is found in human and animal waste, septic systems leaching out into the water. This year, we only closed 3 beaches. We also do something with communicable disease surveillance. We have a software system called MAVEN that stands for the Massachusetts Virtual Epidemiology Network. It's a web-based surveillance system for infectious disease investigation. It's real-time flow with the Mass Department of Public Health and labs, so if someone went in and had a lab reporting one of these communicable diseases, it would come to the Board of Health and it goes to the state epidemiology. We also do tobacco control. Hingham has about 17 tobacco retailers. We do quarterly inspections for compliance with our age regulation, and we inspect, and we do compliance checks, I'll call them, quarterly in all these. We didn't have any violations of any of our tobacco. We just recently went from 19 to 21, which will be effective December 30th. And lastly, we're the arborvirus coordinator for the town, so that's all EEE and West Nile monitoring. So if there's certain spikes in weeks, we would work with the fields and the schools and compliance to that, to maybe close fields at dusk. We've done that in the past. Planning. We do septic system review. I review all repairs of septic systems. The town of Hingham is 70% septic systems, 30% sewer. So I review all the Title V's, work with the engineers to be sure the residents have compliant septic systems. And we have a consulting engineer that does the big subdivisions and over 10,000 gallons a day. We do private well construction plan review, pool plan review, semi-public and residential, building permits, and local emergency planning. Lastly, the enforcement, code compliance with the housing inspections, again, food establishments, tanning salons, camp inspection, nuisance complaints. We have fats, oils, and grease regulations. limiting the amount of grease you can put into our sewer systems for food establishments. We do animal regulation enforcements. We can quarantine any animals in a dwelling, and I work with Leslie Badger on that. And lastly, we have dumpster and recycling regulation enforcement. Here's the permits that we do yearly. There's just a few that I didn't mention. Wastewater treatment plants, any resident that has an innovative alternative septic system, we have to permit those, inspect those. Retail foods, I mentioned a bunch of them, but just shows you the numbers of what we do each year. And lastly, the key initiatives. We did get a social worker permitted last year. She began in September. She works in collaboration with all the town departments. She's under the Board of Health, but she works with veterans, agents, fire, police. It's a wonderful, and it's working, just to let everyone know. She's only here about 8 to 10 hours a week, but she's been able to reach out to everybody, and it's really a nice thing for the town, and it's working well with the residents. We did get a hoarding grant last year, and we collaborated with Situate, and that was to do community education on people with hoarding disorder, associated clutter, and related stigma to hoarding. So we did an educational workshop. Then we did a 3-day training, so we taught people with lived experience how to teach and educate people who are suffering from the disorder, so now they can go out into the community and teach people how to work through their clutter. And lastly, part of the grant, we're working with Boston University School of Social Work on online therapy of hoarding, and they're creating data, because there's not a lot of data on this disorder, so this data will be published through Boston University in a medical journal. That's interesting. A lot of time has been spent on the new leaching field of Derby Street shops. It's currently in failure for the second time. We've permitted it for 54,000 gallons, not the expansion, to be behind Rite Aid, abutting Best Chevrolet. That work is supposedly going to start in January. We're good with it, and it's been permitted through the Board of Health. New permitized software is going to go into effect starting in January. We're working on, the Board of Health is working on revising the supplementary rules and regulations for septic systems, so we're adding new line items for all our A&Rs that we have. Our nitrogen loading requirements will be increased, and financial assurance mechanism is in another section for all potable wells. And then lastly, I'm working with my board on the warrant article for plastic bags. Salaries, we have 3 full-time personnel, myself, an administrative secretary, and a health agent. We have 2 part-time personnel, the public health nurse, she's 30 hours, and my food inspector is also part-time. The expenses of $36,000 roughly account for the social worker, the immunization clinics that I mentioned, and beach testing.
I just want to point out that last year, Susan, you've been with us, is it about 18 months now? Mm-hmm. About 18 months. Susan, you joined us last year. Not long after you joined, it was budget season, and when Susan put together her budget, she said, I want to do this initiative with the social worker, and said, you know what, I think I'm going to look at some aspects of my budget and see if there's some money that I can repurpose rather than asking for an increase. Mm-hmm. And I was so impressed with it then, especially given your very short tenure in the role. Mm-hmm. And it's really been wonderful to see how well that's worked out. And you know, I appreciate your stewardship of the town and your stewardship of the budget.
Well, and, you know, I think the social worker is a prime example. There are so many places where you intersect with other departments, mm-hmm. and, you know, sort of maximize resources by dividing and conquering some of the challenges and, you know, regulatory responses and the like that the town's responsible for. And I think that, to me, that shows great leadership by the Board of Health and you as well, to be able to, I think, work across departments to, get the job done. And the social worker, again, is, I think, something that had been on many department lists, but to house it in the Department of Health and be able to share it across departments, I think, is great. And it sounds, I'm so glad that, you feel it's being effective.
Oh, yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you.
And it seems like, I think before we put it in the budget, I think people were filling that role the best way they could, but not with the degree of professionalism that a licensed social worker can.
Exactly. I'm not a licensed social worker. I have my master's in public health, and we all, with the public health nurse and elder services, we do the best we can from what we've learned, but now we have a licensed social worker for the town of Hingham, and it's a wonderful asset.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Doing a great job.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
Okay.
Okay, almost right on time.
All right, we're 5 minutes over, but at this point, I'd invite the advisory committee to join us at the table. We're going to have 3 items of discussion: budget presentation, OPEB, actuary, valuation, fund balance memo. We got a hard stop at 8:30, so let's make it count.
So all the advisory ones come up from the front. I apologize, I meant to put reserve these 2 rows, and none of you that are seats available up front for the 12 of you that are.
I suspect Donna needs to call her meeting to order. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm calling the December 11th meeting of the Advisory Committee to order at 7:35.
Okay. Welcome, fellow citizens. All right, Tom, what do we have?
So, as we know, we've been doing things a little bit different this year in terms of presentations and overviews of the budget process, and we thought it would be helpful in this annual joint session with advisory to give a brief overview of the entirety of the town non-school governmental budget, our process and who we are and what we do. So Michelle is going to walk us through that, and then we'll kick into Linda Borneval is here, our actuary, to discuss OPEB, and then we'll do a fund balance memo presentation, and we have 60 minutes.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm going to run through this fairly quickly because of the limited time. But as Tom said, we're going to step back a little bit and look at the big picture for the FY19 budget on the town non-combined services side. These are some stats that give you a sense of the scope of the services here in town. We have about 200 employees on the non-school side, and we're supporting, as you know, several hundred local elected and appointed officials across more than 70 boards, committees, and commissions. The town is managing over 20 municipal buildings, not including schools, including Town Hall, all of the structures in Bear Cove Park, the Memorial Bell Tower, the South Shore Country Club, the library, etc. Some of the other metrics that we wanted to point out are that the town, we manage 140 miles of public roads, 60 miles of sidewalks, and 10,000 drainage structures. Our assessing department is looking at 8,700 properties every year with a total assessed value of over $7 billion. We're cutting about 600 checks every week. Our treasurer is managing and investing almost $100 million, and we have about 17,000 registered voters in town with very good turnouts. Highlighting a few more of the service demands and the services that the town provides, we have over 22,000 police calls in FY18 and over 4,000 fire department calls annually, which includes a lot of medical calls. We're managing over 2,000 acres of open space and over 10,000 public shade trees every year. What's really stood out to me was the 7,000 to 8,000 vehicle trips per week to the transfer station in town, a very utilized service. We also provide sewer service for about 2,700 residents and businesses in town, issue many building permits. You heard from Barbara Farnsworth just before about the incredible services provided by our senior center, which include over 35 weekly programs. And the town clerk right downstairs is issuing over 2,000 vital records and permits and licenses each year. So we're very, very busy on the town side of things. Much of the work that the town departments are doing every day is driven by state and federal mandates. You heard Susan Sarney mention some of them that the Health Board deals with. So these are just a snapshot of some of the organizations at the state and federal level that we're working with on a daily basis. Continuing with the big picture, again, this is the town side that is not combined services, not including the schools. So you can see on the left that we are a people-oriented, a personnel-heavy, service-oriented industry. So much of the town side costs are driven by salaries and wages, almost 71%. And if we added the South Shore Regional Emergency Communication Facility, their personnel costs, that would be almost 80% of the town side budget. On the right side, you can see the budget broken down into the different categories in the budget book. We've separated out police, fire, and other public safety, and you can see that between public safety and public works, most of the town side of the budget is going towards protecting the community and maintaining the community and our facilities here. In terms of budget growth, so the FY19 town side budget you can see is a little bit over 27 million. And the town has worked hard to try to control budget growth over the last several years. You can see in the 1.7% in the last 10 years that some of the effects of the recession were in there as well. The town also works hard to try to take advantage of grant opportunities to bring in some non-tax revenue. So in FY18, we were able to bring in a little bit more than $1 million in non-school grants. Some of the biggest items there were money for the Emergency Communications Center, Chapter 90 funding, which is for roads, DEP recycling grants for our transfer station, and some of the elder services funds that Barbara mentioned earlier, supporting the transportation program. If you look at the 4.4 million in revenue from permits and fees, these are part of our local receipts. Building permit revenue was fairly high last year, 2.3 million, but we'd like to point out that 1.1 million of that was from 3 large projects, the Alliance, Brio, and Avalon projects, and that's one-time building permit revenue that comes in, so that's not something we can count on year after year. Much of the rest of that permit are from more standard renovations that folks are doing around town. We also have 1.4 million in ambulance fees through the fire department and almost $300,000 through mooring permits that come in through the harbor master's office, as well as other local license fees and permits. As I mentioned before, we're a people-heavy service industry, so much of our budget is going to be taken up by employee benefits. You can see that on the left. And the town works hard to try to control these costs as best we can as well. We wanted to highlight some of the debt service that is paid for by taxpayers. So this comes from our debt schedule. And what you see here on the left is excluded debt, and on the right, non-excluded debt. All of this does not include self-supporting debt such as sewer projects, something like the Lincoln School Apartments, which is supported by some of the rents, and this also is net of any reimbursements from the MSBA and other sources of funding for some of our school projects. So you can see that in FY19, the total is about $5.4 million. Moving towards the FY20 Town Administrator recommended budget. Between the FY19 budget and the FY20 recommendation, the increase is about $1.2 million, or 4.5%. We've broken that out into a few different categories below and on the right. You can see that we're taking some steps to try to correct some of the structural deficits we've identified in the budget. So things like snow removal and legal services, we're incrementally trying to increase those to a level that makes it easier for us to plan for those expenses. Also, much of the increase is driven by mandates and compliance, such as veterans benefits that increase, a state-mandated dam inspection that's coming up in FY20, some recycling costs that have gone up, and as well as an allocation for the reserve fund to stay in line with our financial policy. We'll also talk a little bit more about the additional requests that came in at about 203, that are recommended at $203,000 this year. In terms of the two structural deficits I just mentioned, snow removal is one of them, legal services the other. On these charts, in the budget is the black line, which is at the bottom of both charts. The red line that is more, that varies more greatly is the actual costs over the last 10 years. And the green line is a target that we've identified that we think is reasonable, and that's what we're working up to. The target for snow removal is about $800,000, and for legal services is $350,000. These are items that if we increase at the level that we are recommending this year, we can hit both of these targets in about 5 fiscal years, and this will help us plan better for these services. Finally, the additional requests that came in through the departments this year on the town side of the budget totaled $314,035. The town administrator has already reduced these requests and is recommending 65%, or $203,778 of these additional requests in the FY20 budget. That was a very fast overview, but hopefully it was helpful.
We could take questions if there are any. We do still have the OPEB process to go through, but
I just make a point while this slide is up to members of the advisory committee. I think we all know going into this budget process, every request from every department head in the entire town, the whole town, is very worthy. And the town administrator's the town administrator is not recommending some of these items, not because they're not necessary, but with an eye towards our financial forecast and understanding that, you know, we can't always afford to do everything we want when we want to do it.
This is a helpful big picture before we jump in. It's very helpful to step back and see the forest before we start counting the trees. And we have no doubt you'll be counting the trees.
Lots of trees.
Lots of trees. So, Michelle, the extra snow money was put in as a structural deficit, addressing a structural deficit rather than an additional request, right? You framed it. So DPW is listed here as a 0 for additional requests, so that the snow money is just in a different,
The snow
reflected
money
differently.
is an additional request, or it's an additional request recommended by the town administrator.
to address a structural deficit in the
Yes,
budget.
for both of those items.
You know, I mean, my reaction to the structural deficits, too, is that those spikes that we see, I think you, probably better than anybody, can point to some of the planning board activities that led to increased legal costs, for instance, and snow, we can point to, you know, certain years where it's just extraordinary, so.
15 in particular.
Right. So it's hard to, you know, I don't know, it's hard to budget to the spike, so I appreciate the fact that you've got a kind of a reasonable target that we're aiming to meet, you
In
know,
both of these
over
cases,
several cycles.
we're aiming for about 75 to 85% of the average over the last 5 or 10 years, because we know some of the spike years will be over, but we can see that we're clearly underfunded, so we're just trying to get closer to a more reasonable budget number.
And I don't know whether the advisory folks have been, you know, watching Channel 9 or the Channel 9 reruns like I do, but you know, I think the narratives from each of the departments have been very helpful to understand just how hard the budget dollars that are allocated get worked in this town, so.
My colleagues from the advisory committee like to
Questions?
comment, or?
Could you speak a little louder sometimes?
Oh, sorry, I
Sure.
forgot that, yeah.
Would my colleagues from the advisory committee like to comment? We can move on to the next item.
On the previous slide, what's the individual amount for snow and legal that you're doing annually? Is it 15 and?
In terms of the increase
annual
recommended,
Over each year, up for the 5 years?
we're recommending for snow, adding $50,000 this year and over the next several years, and then for legal, $25,000.
So 50 and 25?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Michelle. Why don't we move on to the next item?
You asked a question about legal services, what that's involving,
Well, let's see,
but why it's so up.
what we have is As Johnson pointed out, sir, we have permitting issues in this town that have involved a lot of legal effort, especially with respect to the 40B comprehensive permit. It's very complex, and the stakes are high, so clearly we want to get it right, and that's very time intensive. And I'm talking about Alliance, I'm talking about Avalon on Lincoln Street, talking about Riverstone on Ward Street, and I mean, that's illustrative, but, you know, there are other items as well, so you're welcome. Okay, welcome. Again. Good to see you. All right, before we start with calendar.
Okay, so as I mentioned, Linda Borneval is here from KMS Actuaries, and she is going to give us our presentation regarding the town of Hingham's position with regards to OPEB, which is other post-employment benefits.
Okay, good evening, thanks for having me. Coincidentally, I was here December 12th last year, so I guess it's becoming an annual.
Time of year.
When I looked at my last year's presentation. So what we decided to do is, as you can tell, 3 pages, right, not including the cover, because I just wanted to make sure you knew why I was here. Really kind of just go over what is OPEB and what it really means, where the town currently is at in terms of liability, unfunded liability, and that kind of thing, and then throw out some recommendations or ideas on where do we go from here. Okay, so OPEB. OPEB is just an acronym meaning other post-employment benefits, and the other is anything other than a traditional pension plan. So pensions are not included in any of this. That is a totally different program that the town offers through the Hingham retirement system. This is not that. These are your typically medical, health insurance, life insurance policy you may offer, and it's really offerings to the retirees, post-employment, once you are retired. The actuarial and accounting kind of worlds think about that as deferred compensation. So if you are deferring compensation, just like you would be in a pension plan, there are certain accounting rules that you need to follow in order to recognize those promises and liabilities that you have incurred by deferring the compensation. So you've made the promise while you're working here. You may pay a little less to compensate for the promise that you made so that all of your retirees can be covered through health insurance and life insurance. So that's the benefit that is the other post-employment benefit. Okay, so that keeps that clear, separate from pensions. What ends up happening is when you make promises to your employees for future benefits to be paid, there is a series of these payments that are going to come due, and some of them are due now. You're paying them now. For your retirees, the town does contribute portions of their health insurance premium, depending on when they're retired. Coverage is also available to spouses of those retirees, and including surviving spouses. So what ends up happening, you've got current retirees, but remember, you've made the promise to your current employees for a future benefit. So thinking about the youngest employee that you may have, you have this series of projected benefits out into the future, technically until that youngest person dies. So you're looking at possibly, 80, 90, 100 years out into the future on all these benefits that have been promised that you need to kind of take accounting for. So what ends up happening is you build a model, you look at your employees that you currently have in the town, your retirees, and we look at all the health insurance program that is offered to them, and we can quantify down to the present value of all of those future benefits that are going to be expected to be paid. We like to use the word expected. These are never, it will never come true that the benefits we think are going to happen 40 years from now will actually be there. But, we develop this model and we kind of recast it every couple of years so that we can fine-tune it with more recent current data.
All right, so what are the pieces? The pieces are your data, your employees and retirees, the plan provisions, what do you offer, and most importantly, how does the plan premium split between the town and your retirees? As I mentioned before, there's a schedule of cost-sharing arrangements that are, with benefits, that detail all of those. We have all those details. And then on top of that, we need to assign some actuarial assumptions to the future. When do we think people are going to retire? When do we think the retirees, how long are they going to live? What about people who leave the town that they technically may not even ever vest into this benefit? So there's a lot of assumptions about the demographics of your people that we need to create. Two most important assumptions are your economic assumptions. One of them is how these health insurance premiums are going to increase in the future. That is a huge piece of this model. And the other one is, once we've got all of these benefits sort of figured out into the future, how do we discount them back to the present to come up with this present value of benefits, okay? That's the model, these are the benefits. Our last item, the financial statements. In the past few years, starting in 2006, 7, and 8, the GASB came up with this, you must start quantifying these benefits. And that's when the GASB came out with GASB 43 and GASB 45. They really were just note disclosures. There was an obligation that we were keeping track of. We kind of came up with this, what we thought you should pay. And of course, you are paying toward OPEB. You're paying the town's portion of everybody's health, or the retirees' health insurance. So we were keeping track of this difference between what we thought you should pay in an actuarially determined method versus what you actually were paying. That liability landed on your balance sheet. Okay, effective this last fiscal year, 2018, GASB kind of revamped the entire program. 43 and 45 are out, replaced by 74 and 75. What now is happening is the full unfunded liability of the promise is being recorded on the balance sheet. Okay, so every community in the entire country is facing this issue because most governmental entities do provide some kind of post-employment benefit like this. So now we have an unfunded liability. It's about $65 million for the OPEB benefits. Effective in the financial statements that are about to be published, that $65 million will land on the balance sheet. So as mentioned, there's a few assumptions that are important. How are we going to discount that thing? There's a whole lot of different ways to discount and different investment returns that one could use. We are actually using what's the long-term rate of return on the assets that have been set aside. And there's about $15 million set aside at this point. With that, and the town's history of contributions that they've made, in addition to the informal kind of funding policy that's been in place, we're able to discount that at the long-term rate. Communities that have no assets set aside, they're discounting those payments using a 20-year high-quality municipal bond rate. Right now, that's ranging about 3.5%, 3.8%. So the difference between our long-term rate of return, that's kind of like 7.5%, versus like a 3.8% return is huge. If we were discounting these benefits using that 3.5, that's probably about doubles your liability. So there's an incentive to, in terms of your financial statements, to have these assets set aside and have a kind of policy and some history on how you've been pre-funding this thing. Just like we have in the retirement system, there is a fund that has been established. But remember, on the retirement side, Mass state law says that those retirement unfunded liabilities must be fully funded by 2040. There is no mandate that's comparable on the OPEB side. All right, it really is up to local decisions and local control on whether or not you're going to pre-fund. So that is kind of a big difference between retirement and OPEB. That is the what is OPEB. Okay, so the next slide is really the current status. I mentioned you have an unfunded liability of about $65 million. That's at June 30th, 2018. We're 17.6% funded. You kind of are going to look at that and say, ooh, but that actually is a pretty good funded ratio for an unmandated benefit, right? Not every community, there are many communities that's a zero. There are just no assets, or I worked on one today, 0.01% funded. It didn't even show up on the way we, show our funded ratio with only one decimal point. So, the plan is, as that 17.6, the open plan is, okay, when would the town consider that should be fully funded? There's nothing that's guiding us there. It's really on, when you think that we should start putting in a more formal funding policy to help bring that funded ratio up, get that unfunded liability down. This chart here is really just a little kind of history since 2012 on the line going across is really how your assets are growing, and it's like I said, right around 15 million at this point that we're projecting it out to be at 2020. And the green bars are the contributions that you've made since 2012 annually. Kind of gives you a little idea of where we're going. Now, the question becomes, how do you control that liability? Okay. Again, the liability is this present value of all these future benefits. The benefit is sort of set. It is what it is. Its statute does require a minimum contribution by the town of at least 50% of the premiums for retirees. So if you're at the 50%, which you are, there's not much to do in terms of any kind of benefit structure change. Okay? So the other scenario is, okay, looking back now on the liability side, if you do pre-fund some of this benefit, then those benefits do not have to be funded solely by tax revenue, right? You want to have this fund set aside, hopefully earning, and our long-term expectation is 7.5. We get a lot of pushback on that rate, but we're looking at this in a very long-term fashion. As I mentioned, you have 20, 30, 40-year-olds there that we are trying to fund for. If we put that money aside now for when they retire and live into their retirement, we're hoping over the long run, yes, we know there will be good years and bad, but we want that to average out at about a 7.5% return. So for pre-funding, some places kind of, just have a random budget item that maybe they might be just increasing that budget item every year. There are ways to come up with, an actuarially determined type of method, the way retirement is. Retirement is an actuarially determined contribution that that we use, we amortize the unfunded over a certain period of time, and again, statute says by 2040 that has to be funded. Here, there's all kinds of expectations. So I put together a few little things. We have a current pattern going on right now from those green bars that you saw. If we continue with that pattern and we add another $250,000, remember, we're at 65 million right now, but you can become 67% funded by the year 2040, but your unfunded has grown because, time value of money, everything is always going to increase until you start paying at least interest on that unfunded. Okay, so I just threw out some kind of examples of if you did put in certain dollar amounts, if you added another $5 million in there today, yes, you could become 77% funded. Communities are working on this right now. They're trying to decide what is a reasonable funded ratio at what point do we want to be at that particular funded ratio. So this funding scenario, it's unlimited, right? There are so many different possibilities that you could actually be thinking about. One of the things that some communities are kind of throwing around is when their retirement system becomes fully funded. Now, fully funded does not ever mean no further contributions go in. You always have on retirement member contributions adding to the trust, but you also are paying for current benefits being earned. All right, same here. When you are unfunded, it might not necessarily mean that you'll never put more money in. If you become very funded, over 100% funded, that is a possibility. But these programs are expected to continue forever. There's pretty much a zero probability that a municipal entity will disappear and not offer these benefits. So there's always new benefits being earned by employees. So one of the options is that you look at the retirement system that is expected to be fully funded. That is going to release a lot of money that is expected to be paid out from now till 2035. So some are looking at a model that says, okay, we're going to try to put some money in from now till 2034, and in 2035, let's throw that pot of money, or a percentage of that pot of money, right, into OPEB. So it's another idea. So recommendations, because there are so many different funding scenarios, we could provide you with a stack this high with a bunch of charts that you're all just going to go, some of the things that we're talking about at OPEB committees is, develop some funding goals. What are the goals? What do you think or where do you think you want to be at some particular time? Then we can develop some funding scenarios so that you can see what will get us to that goal. And of course, you're going to fine-tune that model every year. This is a very volatile benefit, by the way. Health insurance, we do have expectations on how we think they're going to increase over the years. But that is something that's a little bit different than retirement. Retirement is pretty stable in terms of the benefits that are provided. This benefit is a little more volatile because of the health insurance issues. So those are my prepared remarks. Be happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you. Thank you very much again. Questions from my colleagues? Comments?
Thanks, Linda. So one question would be, how the OPEB fund, I guess, operates on an annual basis. So every year, we would have an obligation due for our 50% of retired employee health benefits, right?
That's correct.
And so we could make withdrawals from the OPEB account, or we would fund it like we fund, say, workers' comp, where we self-insure for that amount. Is that right, Sue?
Well, the 50% of retirees' health insurance is in the group insurance budget right now.
Okay.
This trust is for future. So
Okay.
It's fully funded. The group insurance budget amount in the retirement
would decrease.
budget amount will decrease
Okay.
dramatically.
So we're currently funding our obligation, and this is to ensure that we can pay that obligation on a go-forward basis?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just pick up on that. One of the reasons that we started OPEB and that I think municipalities got concerned was, right now, we have about $8 million in next year's budget for group insurance. And that's insurance both for current employees as well as retirees. And it was estimated that if we continued to do that, what we call pay-as-you-go, group insurance, just that one line in the budget, over time would grow to the point where it would be about 25% of our budget. Right now, it's about 8%. So we realized that this was going to be a budget buster. Moreover, as a town, we feel like this is a promise that we're making to, we've seen the best of our employees over the last couple of weeks with all these budget meetings, and we feel that we have a responsibility to make sure that that commitment we made to have those benefits that they are counting on and making life choices on, that we can honor. Just for benefit of some of the newer members of advisory, Hingham was one of the first communities that started contributing to OPEB. We did it in 2008 when Karen was on the advisory committee, the worst possible time to take $1 million out of your operating budget and say we're going to save for this. But we did it, and it's one of the reasons that we retained our AAA bond rating. And at that time, we said, let's put together a 30-year funding schedule. And we've been following that schedule, but as Linda's pointed out, there's been a lot of volatility. And we've also, as a town, we've changed health insurance providers. We used to be with the Mayflower Group, now we're with the GIC. So as much as we can put together a 30-year funding schedule, every 2 years, Linda gives us an update on what's changed. And, we have a lot of choices to make. a suggestion that I might make to my colleagues is that this is really very helpful information, and it's coming at a really good time, because we're just starting the budget process. And, I might suggest that we ask our financial team to, in conjunction with perhaps the liaison group for the advisory committee, to maybe talk about some funding goals and scenarios to bring back to us, perhaps next month, where we can talk about, where we want to be. There's another variable in all this that, I realize that by virtue of how much money we've saved, and Hingham has led the charge in this. I think we're one of the first to start contributing in a substantial way to OPEB. We're farther along than a lot of our peers. As Linda said, this has an implied investment return rate of 7.5%. And, I just, that is also subject to volatility.
Right.
So I think we have to consider a lot of different variables. And, to me, at a minimum, we added $250,000 to the funding schedule last year. To me, that would be the starting point for this year's budget. I feel like if we slid back, we would start to lose some of the progress that we were making and like kind of fall behind a little bit. So I wouldn't want that to happen, but the question of what's the goal, how quickly do we get there, this has given us a lot of great information to start that conversation, and, we'll look forward to getting your help on, maybe running a couple scenarios that and maybe, Tom, you could, with Sue and Michelle's help, take the lead on that.
Thank you once again for coming in and providing that explanation. Is there anybody from the advisory committee who'd like to?
I have a question. If the future obligation is 75, and you said there's 14 to 15 million of assets, then why wouldn't that unfunded be 60 to 61 million rather than 65?
It was 79 million.
Oh, because that slide you had at 75.
Oh, it had the
If
old.
you go back
Can
up.
change it.
Yeah,
Oh.
It had 75.
We found that typo this morning and fixed it. So it was
79.
It was a 79 liability. And every year, these are snapshots in time, so those things they grow with time, they grow with age. One comment, if I could add, something that you mentioned that kind of triggered my a thought. Again, I like to kind of compare this to retirement. Retirement systems are very mature, right? Their assets, the funded ratios are much higher than these OPEB programs. When a 2008 hits a retirement system, it hit it hard because they were so mature and had assets to lose. At this stage, I want to call it's really at the young stages of these, the volatility, again, is not so much on the assets, but really on the benefits provided, kind of the flip of the retirement. But of course, as we get that pot of money and that grows, then the volatility of the market comes into play. So, watching that. This is including light department assets. There are two kind of sources of funding that are going on. Right now, the light department has, I want to say, 5 million of the light piece. So they're kind of sitting as in a fully funded situation, whereas it's the town's piece that is still funding. Because I think light department probably more aggressively, and that's typical throughout the Commonwealth, by the way. Light departments tended to aggressively fund their OPEB early on, so there are a lot of light departments that are very well funded.
Yes, sir.
Can I just ask a point of clarification on the 7.5%? Is that based on a long-term?
Excuse me, sir.
Perspective?
I'm directed to put you to the mic. Identify yourself by name and address, please.
Jim O'Hare, 11 Heron Way. Just as a point of clarification, which I didn't understand, but it was the 7.5%. Is that based on a historical long-term rate of return in reference to, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said some other plans were using a 3.5% on a 20-year basis.
Okay.
So I was just kind of curious as to the origin, and I'm not disputing that it's incorrect. I'm just interested in the origin of that number.
Sure. The town's assets are invested with PRIT, the Pension Reserve Investment Trust Fund. That's where the state pension has their money. So the investment consultants for the state actually prepare what's called the building block method, and they have an investment policy that is broken out between equities, fixed income, all kinds of different investment vehicles. They will assign a long-term rate of return to each of those classes of assets, and we review that and say, based on this investment portfolio and these long-term rates of return, we can, and again, it's from their expertise of their long-term outlook, and the long-term outlook is 30-plus years. Then we can say, for this portfolio, then we are comfortable with a 7.5% return. Why are some communities using more the 3.5%, 3.8%? They do not have assets set aside at all. They have basically a liability, and the way the GASB looks at this is that liability really is kind of like debt owed by communities, and the long-term, I'm not a municipal finance expert, but the long-term or the municipal bond rate is what the rate you would use to borrow funds technically. So that's the sort of rationale for using that municipal bond rate. Some communities have some money set aside, but really no future plan to continue to invest, to contribute to that trust. So it's some blended rate in between that we look at.
Thank you very much.
All right, you're welcome.
Okay, let's move on to fund balance.
All right,
Thank you so much, Linda.
That's a fun-
welcome.
Right on schedule.
Good, good, good.
I'll comment privately afterwards. Sue?
My turn. Okay, this is my yearly fund balance memo for FY18. The total general fund balance for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2018, known as FY 2018, is $35,658,086, as compared to the fund balance from last fiscal year, 2017, of $32,561,028, which represents an increase of $3,097,058. The total annual expenditures for FY18 was $112,180,550. So the percent of unassigned fund balance to total annual expenditures is 24.15. There's 4 categories of fund balance. We have restricted, and that's from the sale of the Hersey House at $1.25 million. The committed is $5.3 million. That consists of the 2 stabilization funds we have, mooring permits that we self-commit, special articles, the Lincoln School Apartment article that they could borrow up to $1 million, and a new one that we just started in FY18 was the unused, non-excluded debt of $18,000. The assigned fund balance is a little less than $2 million. That encompasses all the encumbrances and subsequent year's expenditures. The unassigned fund balance is $27,091,744. The change in fund balance of a little over $3 million is mostly attributed to 3 categories. The surplus of revenue of approximately $3.63 million, a budget surplus of approximately $1.8 million, minus the use of free fund balance of $2.43 million. The revenue surplus was $3.6 million. Out of that, $3.4 million was from local receipts. The 5 categories from local receipts was license and permits, about $1.75 million, of which in Michelle's slides, 1.1 was for one-time local receipts from the 3 big projects. We had a surplus in in investment income of $566,986. Basically, that was due to the MMDT rate tripling in a year and the amount of money we have in the bank. Motor vehicle excise was up $484,565. Ambulance fees was up $436,913. Meals tax was up $95,598. And these were all compared to the forecast. General fund expenditures, the budget surpluses of $1.8 million. Employee benefits led the way at $588,869, and that was basically from group insurance. It's very difficult to forecast group insurance with the GIC. There's 15 different plans, and when they said an average of 2% increase for FY18, they didn't tell us that some went down, some went up, and so to forecast that is very difficult. General government was $446,474. Led the way was town hall of $240,000, the reserve fund of $78,000, IT for $38,000, selectmen $23,000, accounting about $15,000, and the rest about $50,000. Cultural and rec, there was a budget surplus of $184,000 from library. $100,000 was for the roof project that came under budget of about $100,000. Public Works, budget surplus of DPW of $110,000. Debt service was savings of $175,000 from the refunding. Public safety, a budget surplus of street lighting of $32,000. That was due to the light plant reducing the rates by 30%. Police and fire, about $50,000. Human resource, a budget surplus from veterans of $60,000. Health department of $30,000. Education was a $94,000 surplus, and that was from FY18's encumbrances not expended. Just to make a point that all these are just one time, we can't count on these every single year. I mean, 1.8 is about 1% of a total annual budget of over $100 million, and I think that's just very, very good fiscal management. Anybody have any questions?
And so, Sue, I think we talked about this a little bit, but the budget surpluses of $1.8 million, those do not include some of the money that we had to draw out of the reserve fund at the end of the fiscal year, and that was about $900,000?
Yes.
So I think just, for the advisory committee, we have a standard format to this particular document, so you had two things going on. You had kind of, some budget surpluses on paper of 1.8, but remember, at the end of the year, we made a lot of transfers into budgets to close out the year. And what we try to do is we transfer that money in to make sure we have enough with the understanding that it would be returned. So if you look at the budget surplus, in fact, I think that was about $900,000. Yeah, I would just, so, thank you. As we look at this, and again, just a little historical perspective for the advisory committee, but we were put on credit watch, or, we were put on credit watch 10 years ago because our reserve fund as a percentage of our total assets was
8.9.
Karen, you were on there, it was like
8.9.
It was 8%, and this has been tremendous progress thanks to the collective efforts of everybody. We're in a situation where we can have a conversation that we've wanted to have for a long time, which is, the unassigned fund balance exceeds the upper limit of the threshold of the financial policy. Frankly, when I look at the capital projects that we have in the pipeline, I think that's a good thing. And I would just add that as we look at the local receipts forecast this year, I know with Sue and Michelle and Tom, they are going to take a careful look. We want to be conservative so that we're not counting on revenue to be there every year that isn't. Having said that, with a fund balance as strong as ours is, I think that gives us a little bit of flexibility that we perhaps haven't had in recent years. Obviously, we want to maintain a healthy balance, and we want to make sure that we're not counting on money to be there every year until we're sure it's going to be. Because as Michelle showed in the slides, and you'll see with the school department, this is a people-intensive business, so we want to be sure that we have the ability not only to pay the bills next year, but also in the out years.
She summed it up, as always. No, I just, I remember we had some conversations last year at the end of the budget process, both with this board and with the advisory committee about, my concern in particular about drawing down unassigned fund balance for recurring expenses. So I think, I agree with you, Sue. I think what this shows is not only sound fiscal management for the prior fiscal year, but sound fiscal management for the last several decades, when other fiduciaries sat in these seats and made the hard decisions that we're all forced to make again this year, balancing, I think, service needs, personnel needs, and really the fiscal reality of operating a very complex, very expensive organization. And I think that we talked last year potentially about coming up with some parameters around drawdowns from unassigned fund balance that we could all agree, I think, fits our financial stewardship model. And to that end, I think on both sides, both in terms of revenue coming in and expenditures going out, in terms of those deltas from the prior year, as you said in your earlier presentation, Michelle, we can point to the one-time occurrences that have fallen our way. We've had some good fortune that have created these figures for us. But I guess, to put it plainly, to hire personnel based on one-time monies, when we make promises to these personnel, these folks going forward to be part of our team, I'm not sure that that's entirely responsible. So I guess I'd look forward to some conversations about what makes sense in reviewing, I guess, that upper level portion of our unassigned fund balance and how we direct that, I think, as carefully as we can, on the part of the town. We said last week, here, and the advisory committee are part of this team that does this too, when we pay our tax bills, when each of us pay our tax bills, the folks in this room tonight do an awful lot of work to make sure that every single one of those dollars matters and counts. And we don't want to take more money from you than we have to, and we want to run the operation as effectively as we can and responsibly as we can. So, I'm very proud of this fund memo, Sue. Good work by the financial team, and really good work by all of the departments for, I think, being as responsible as they can within their budget. I think to Mary's point, we also trust that there's been a culture here, I think, that people just don't go out and blow their budget at the end of the fiscal year. They're managing to the need, not to the number. And, I think this fund balance memo is a testament to that. So, thank you.
Sue, I'd add to that. Thank you very much. I'm holding to an 8:30 deadline. Would the advisory committee like to say anything before we depart?
I have just a clarification question. On the third page, Sue, the unassigned fund balance is at 26,691. How does that compare to the 27?
That one, I had to correct, that is an error.
So the 26 is error?
Yeah, no, the 26 is right. If the third page, there is a line reserved for the Education Special Trust Fund, $400,000. That does not have to be reserved because we already put it in a trust fund. So that takes out, and if you take it out, it will come down to the 26.
Okay, so the Special Education Trust Fund is something accounted for separately?
Yes, it's in its separate trust fund. We used to reserve it, and then we made the trust fund, so we took the money and put it in the trust fund. So it's not in fund balance anymore. Okay.
And then a question, I was curious, on the Town Hall, the 240, was there any one particular item that led to that in terms of the budget, or is this just a lot of small things added up?
I believe it was the electric line item. Shrek money came in, and what they did, they budgeted for the gross instead of the net, and that made the surplus much bigger.
Any other questions, Counsel?
I'm fine.
Anybody else? Okay, it's 8:30. Thank you so much for coming in.
Well done, thank you very
All right.
much. The advisory committee is now going to reconvene on the third floor to continue our budget reviews. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Thank you.
Pleasure. Always nice to see the advisory.
Good luck,
committee.
advisory committee.
We're all here.
We need to be careful to not be reading this.
I know.
I'm saying out loud for my benefit most of all.
I hear you. We'll see.
Or maybe not.
Bye, David.
Did I say that? Sorry. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome back. See a lot of familiar faces in the audience. We have, as the final agenda item of the evening, and I'll read it just so that it's clear, the discussion relative to the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee. It's limited in scope. And if anybody wishes to be recognized, you know the drill. Raise your hand. Call on you, come up to the microphone, identify yourself by name and address, direct your questions to the chair if you would kindly do so. So with that having been said, Tom? There you go. What do we got?
So the reason this is on the agenda, Mr. Chairman, is since we're getting close to receiving the third-party financial analyses back, I thought it would be helpful to ask the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee to review the information relating to the potential purchase, and then to get back to the Board of Selectmen with a recommendation. So it seemed like a prudent step, and wanted to have that conversation.
Okay. So how do you see the timetable on this? Because I think that there's people in this room that probably want to get into the discussion generally, which I don't think is the purpose of tonight's meeting, but I didn't want to just
Sure.
And that's not out there in the world of concerned citizens who came in here tonight.
So I would, the problem with a broader discussion is that the agenda item is specific to the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee. So to the extent that there's public comment related to the Acquisition Study Committee, I think that that's probably appropriate, in whatever fashion you feel appropriate. We do have counsel, Ryan is here, if we wanted to ask him to join us, should we need his expertise in the process. I just wanted you to know he's here.
Perhaps you could refresh the residents' memory as to the Water Study Acquisition Committee. Who are they? When were they formed?
So I don't have the dates on when they were formed. The Water Company Acquisition Study Committee is made up of 5 members. John Asher is the chair. You also have Ed Siegfried, Josh Krumholtz, Joe Beerworth, and Bob Higgins are members of that committee.
Okay. And at this point, what would you envision the steps that we take be?
Well, we have a vote on tonight, and again, just to help to give them the form, the structure they need to do their work, I would suggest that we ask them to review the available information and then report back to the board with a recommendation.
Is that in anticipation of what we believe is coming in shortly?
Yeah, I mean, in order to know what to do, we want to cross all of our Ts and dot all of our Is, right?
All right. Do you have any questions?
Just, I guess, the timeline, so we would reactivate them potentially, or, you know, that they've, as a committee, I guess, they haven't been really working to date, right? So we'd ask them, we'd provide them with some additional information and ask them to review it. Do we have a sense of this timeline, or?
So there's no need to reactivate them, per se. They are an active committee. We have a lot of information for them to formally review, and I think that this is an opportunity for them to schedule meetings, public meetings, and hold those discussions in public, review that material, and then come back to us with a recommendation at the end of that process.
Okay. Questions? Comments?
No, you know, I think in Hingham, we have a pretty deliberative process. And, you know, typically when we have a body of citizen volunteers who have been following an issue, and certainly this group, it was formed, I believe, as part of or shortly after the 2012 annual town meeting. I think that it gives the benefit of this group to take all of the information, including what I think you're saying, which is that the work that the town has commissioned will be available shortly, and that would give the Water Acquisition Study Committee a chance to review that information, any other information, a public process to hear from citizens. It would, you know, this is kind of how we do things in Hingham. We have a citizen committee that makes recommendations to the Board of Selectmen. To the extent that that results in warrant articles, the Board of Selectmen hold public hearings. The advisory committee holds public hearings with a decision ultimately being made at town meetings. So I think that deliberative, thoughtful, purposeful process has served us well. I think that it makes sense to me. And, you know, I think at the beginning of this meeting, we heard a desire from a citizen that information be made available to the public, and this is the way that we do that in Hingham. So it feels appropriate.
I would also remind the public that there are numerous documents relating to the research done to date on the website, all available publicly and have been for quite some time, so.
Okay. I'm going to offer the motion. It'll be seconded. Anybody who'd like to comment, be given the opportunity to do so, but it's a procedural vote as opposed to a substantive discussion. So I say that in mind. I'll entertain a motion to request the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee to meet, review available information, and report back to the BOS Board of Selectmen with a recommendation.
So moved.
Second.
Is there discussion? Yes, sir. Identify yourself by name and address, if you would.
Skylar Thaxter, 246 Main Street.
How are you, sir?
Good.
Good.
So I'd just like a little history of this. I hear 2012. When was the Water Acquisition Committee formed, and how often have they met to come up with a recommendation that you're suggesting?
I can, so sir, the Water Acquisition Study Committee was formed in 2012.
Yes, that's right.
And if, I don't know the number offhand, but on the town website, all of the meetings that they've held since 2012, both public sessions and executive session, all of the minutes are posted and available on the town website. I can't remember offhand how many meetings, but...
I just haven't heard about a lot of them. I've heard more about meetings the Aquarium was having than this group.
So-
I have
so
not read
they were-
anything in the newspaper or anything.
Sure. So this group, sir, was formed initially to, develop a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, and that led to the board's decision in 2013 to enter into litigation to determine a purchase price. The town felt, as you know, and you may be aware, the litigation process, that took a few years to resolve. And during that time, the Water Acquisition Study Committee really only met sparingly because until we received finality on the purchase price, there wasn't a lot for them to do. And so the thought is that while they haven't met regularly in the last few years, they've built up a body of expertise. They represent citizens, including 4 former advisory committee chairs, who, we think will give this matter thoughtful deliberation, and frankly, I think this board would like to hear a recommendation from that group. And then certainly it would afford citizens the chance to participate and engage in the beginnings of a public process through them meeting. All of their meetings would be posted. They would have to be posted in compliance with, open meeting. They'll be held in this building. So it will
I'm just
be an
concerned
opportunity.
about being rushed into this, seeing as that seems like there needs to be less money spent and more open discussion, more transparency, and because we've got a lot of projects here on the line, and if you want me to list 5 or 6 of them, I can, and those are certainly more important to my heart than jumping into something that I don't feel we are capable of managing as 3 selectmen or 5 selectmen or as a town.
Well, I appreciate your opinion, sir.
It's just my
Again,
opinion.
this is a limited vote tonight,
I know,
so
I
the
understand.
big argument's yet to come. Yes, sir?
Peter Stathopoulos, 17 Volusia Road. Part of the problem is what we're looking at now. You said 2012. Well, the minutes weren't released until months ago. Most of it was kept executive session, and then they all of a sudden came out. But regardless, one of the things is that do they have parameters set up? One, I've attended meetings, and I'm not going to hide it. I'm not in favor of this. I mean, this is, and I'm a broken record in that regard. But the thing is, for all the meetings was that this would be paid by the ratepayers and not by the town. This was stated at I haven't checked the meeting, the minutes rather. So all of a sudden now it's going to be a general obligation bond that we're talking about here, and
We're not going to get into the weeds on the details, sir. We're just taking a vote to, put this matter forward.
What I'm
the
trying to say is, I think the selectmen would behoove them to set up some parameters of what is expected of it. And right now, it sounds like, here's the answer we want, just draw the plans for the conclusion. I've seen this. I've done cost benefits. But my problem is that we talked to the people of the other towns, Cohasset and Hull. Well, nothing official. What I'm saying is setting up parameters, getting something concrete from these 2 towns that they will participate and to what extent. 2, what sort of is going to be a general obligation, or is it going to be paid by the ratepayers? And if it is the taxes, are you going to be reimbursing the residents that do not have Hingham water? And I'm just asking for parameters to be set up.
Again, sir, with all due respect, we're not getting into those kind of discussion points tonight. We're simply taking a vote to forward the matter to the Water Study Acquisition Committee. These are a group of fellow citizens that are rendering assistance, and that's simply all that they're doing on this issue. So I'm going to decline to engage on those subject matters respectfully.
All right.
Mr. Chair, if I
setting
could,
up parameters would not be...
Mr. Chairman, with respect to the Water Acquisition Study Committee, which is the scope of the agenda item, I believe the charge that Mr. Mayo has given is to review the information that is available, which consists of financial information, engineering information, governance, and to report back to the Board of Selectmen with a recommendation. I would assume that that recommendation would be whether it is advisable for the town, whether they are recommending for the town to purchased the water company. I will just say, with respect to this, and with respect to the Water Acquisition Study Committee, the 5 members on the inception of their committee, they established operating principles, including no preformed ideas, and that they were going to be independent. They have maintained that. These are fine citizens. All 5 of them are fine citizens.
I know them.
Who
They
have
are.
not, excuse me, sir, I have the floor. 5 citizens who have had a distinguished record with this town, and who I'm counting on to give us their opinion about what's in the town's best interest. I'm not expecting a certain outcome. I'm expecting them to give us their best work and their thought about what's best for the town. I think they have a distinguished track record on that, and I would expect no less from them. And I would ask that we all give that committee the benefit of the doubt. I think their years of service have entitled each of them to that courtesy.
We're going to have the debate, sir. Anybody else who'd like to say anything before we take the vote? Seeing...
Jim O'Hare, 11 Heron Way. Mr. Mayo referred to a forthcoming report that was going to be presented. Could you elaborate perhaps on the methodology that was used to determine...
We're not getting into that,
report?
sir.
So,
We're simply not getting into that.
Will that be made public?
This isn't a shell game, sir. We're going to get into the merits at the appropriate time. This is simply a vote to take those steps that we need to do in order to get to that point.
Thank you for your
You're welcome,
courtesy.
sir.
I appreciate your frankness.
Welcome. Mr. Walsh.
John Walsh from Aquarium Water Company. Just one question relative to the Water Study Acquisition Study Committee. Will the public receive your next version of your financial model at the same time that that committee receives the report? Thank you.
I don't want to appeal like a broken record, folks, but we're voting to activate the Water Company Acquisition Study Committee. That's what we're going to do. So
I would just make the comment that any documents that are provided in the context of a public meeting are public documents when they enter into a meeting. Again, we're going to follow the process that we followed with every warrant article, with every piece of business.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. All right, that concludes the meeting. At this point, we're going to do selectmen reports. And Michelle, is there? Thomas?
No, thank you, not tonight.
Well,
No,
Yeah.
let's get out of here.
all right. It was at GR Hall on Saturday for a couple of events. One of them I think Paul will report on, but the other one I'll report on, and that was the VFW Voice of Freedom National Essay Contest. There were students from the middle school and the high school there, that 14 participants in that contest who were the winners, and whose essays will be forwarded on to participate at the national level. Herb Messmer, Frank Curtis, and the leadership of the VFW put on a fantastic ceremony for those young people. And the essay topic was Why My Vote Matters, which seems entirely timely. And I'd like to say that tomorrow night, the three of us have also been invited to a firefighter swearing in. You know, I think sometimes we take these appointments for granted, and then you hear about firefighter tragedies in other communities, and it's important for us to recognize, as Michelle did in the budget today, the commitment of the women and men in uniform that protect us every day. So that's a privilege to be able to attend that tomorrow night.
Thank you.
I would just add this evening that actually on Thursday night, many of us sitting here at this table are going to have the honor of attending a dinner to honor Mr. Healy. And, you know, Paul Healy has served the town for well over 30 years in a variety of ways, and we sometimes forget that Paul actually has a paid job as well. And he is receiving an award for that, and we are all privileged to be able to join in that. And you know, it just reminds me that we are so fortunate in this town to have dedicated volunteers, and I know there are times when the demands of the volunteer roles sometimes compete with the demands of the profession, and we just congratulate...
Every day.
Every day, but we offer our congratulations to Paul and appreciate the invitation to share in what I know will be a special night.
Thank you.
We're hoping we get to like roast you a little. It's not one of those kind of dinners.
I did have the pleasure of attending an Eagle ceremony for one Connor Power at the GAR Hall, which is the Grand Army of the Republic, which is my favorite building in this town. It's deep in history and reflects, you know, the Army of the Potomac and the Army of Georgia and Tennessee from the Civil War. You know, it's history now, but I urge anyone that hasn't been in that building to go there and linger over the displays, because I think that it tells a great story of the nation's history as well as our own town. And Connor's Eagle project involved some substantive landscaping work to, I think, you know, keep the GAR relevant. And so my congratulations to Mary and Dan.
Thank you.
Fine young man. And I see an eagle coming up the ranks behind his older brother, too. So on that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everybody.
Everyone.